In Chapter 6, we're going to look at packaging of food and improper practices found in food establishments. Damaged food packaging can include things like dented cans, swollen or bulged cans, leaking cans, rust and pitting of cans, and cable cuts. Food cans have three seams, the top and bottom seam, and then a seam that runs up the side called the side seam. With cans that have dents, if the dents affect the seams, the contents of the can could be compromised. With the can on the right, there's a dent on the side, but it does not affect the side seam or either of the two end seams, so the canned food is probably safe to eat. With the can on the left, there's a dent that affects the side seam and one of the end seams. The food in this can might be contaminated by exposure to the environment, and you should not use food from this can. This is an example of the bulged can. Notice how the bottom part of the can is actually swollen out past the end seam, and that is what the can is sitting on the counter. This is the top view of the same can. Notice how the can is bulged to the point where the seam is split and the contents of the can are visible. Never use food from a can that looks like this. This picture shows a can that has been damaged and the contents of the can are leaking out. If what is inside the can leak out, then things in the outside environment can get into the can. Don't use food from a leaking can. This picture shows a can that has been exposed to moisture and the can has started to rust with little rust pits. These pits can work their way all the way through the can until the can is open to the environment. Don't use food from a rusty or pitted can. This picture shows cable cuts on the end seam of a can. The cable cut on the right is just cosmetic, but in the one on the left you can see the two dark lines that indicate that the cut goes through the seam of the can, and the food inside the can could possibly be exposed to the environment and could possibly be unsafe to eat. Next, we will look at more pictures of improper practices. In this picture, you can see a food employee working with a ready-to-eat food with their bare hands. Notice that the food employee is also wearing a watch, which is prohibited. In this picture, there are two potential problems. The first problem is that the food is uncovered. The second is that the trays are in direct contact with the food in the tray underneath them, increasing the chances of cross-contamination. This picture shows the interior of a walk-in cooler. Notice how everything is very dirty. There is mold growing, the racks are rusty, and there's a large accumulation of food debris and food residue on the floor. This picture shows the interior of a walk-in freezer. In this picture you can also see a large accumulation of ice, dirt, and food residue on the floor of the walk-in freezer. Also, the floor has been lined with cardboard, which is not an approved surface because it cannot be cleaned or sanitized. In this picture you can see raw meat products in uncovered containers sitting directly on the floor. These products are at room temperature, they're uncovered, and they are stored below exposed sewer lines, which if they leak, would leak sewage directly into the food. This slide shows two ice scoops laying so that the handles of the scoops are in direct contact with the ice, increasing the possibility of cross-contamination. The best place to store ice scoops is in the ice, but with the handles extended so they do not come into contact with the food. For dispensing utensils in general, it is important to use a utensil that has a handle and to store the dispensing utensil in the food being dispensed with the handle sticking up, not in contact with the food. This picture shows the interior bin of an ice machine. The plastic divider of the bin is extending down towards the ice, and you can see the black line of mold and bacteria residue on it. This picture is a close-up of the mold and bacteria residue that is on the divider of the ice bin. Notice how it is in direct contact with the ice. This is direct contamination. In this picture you can see a bag of food that is sitting directly on the floor. Notice that there is a plastic cup used as a scoop in the bag. This plastic scoop does not have a handle, so there is a direct chance of contamination of the food by whatever is on the hands of the people who touched the scoop. In this picture you can see a ready-to-eat food, cooked pasta, that is in close proximity to possible chemical contamination. The bottle of soap on the rim of the sink could fall over into the pasta. The green bucket is filled with soapy wiping cloth water, and the red bucket is filled with chlorinated sanitizer solution. Any one of those could contaminate the pasta and make people sick. In this picture, you can see the back of a fryer. Notice the heavy accumulation of grease. This is probably not as much of a food contamination risk as it is a fire hazard. This picture shows the door tracks of an upright cooler. Notice the large amount of food residue and debris in the tracks. It is important to pay attention to and to regularly clean nooks and crannies where food and food residue can accumulate. Look at this picture. See how many food storage violations you notice. The next slide will detail some of the violations shown. This slide lists the storeroom violations from the previous slide. How many did you find? This slide is also the end of Chapter 6.